Hello, welcome back to my channel. I won't be live later, but I thought I would update you with some news. Well, Christian Porter has resigned from his position as a cabinet minister in the Morrison government. So let's have a look. I've got his official statement. It's 3 pages long, and then let's look at some of the media reports about it. So let's have a read of it. Media statement, Sunday, 19th of September 2021. Statement from Christian Porter. Today I resign my position as a minister in the Morrison cabinet. I thank the Prime Minister and my cabinet colleagues for the strong support they have shown me throughout my period in cabinet. On February 26, 2021, I was the subject of an allegation in an article published by the ABC that was not true. The article depicted events that never happened and which the ABC, in settlement of a defamation case, acknowledged was an allegation that could not be substantiated to the applicable legal standard, criminal or civil. As I tried my best to say at a media conference shortly after the allegation was reported, the initial article and subsequent media reporting has created a new standard under which literally any Australian can be the subject of an accusation widely published and without due process or fairness, be tried and judged in a trial by media. After my experience, it now seems that part of modern public life that if you're a politician, particularly a conservative politician, a mere allegation is considered enough to warrant an accusation being widely published, regardless of its inability to be proven to a civil or criminal standard. From the moment the ABC article was published, I entered what appears to me now to be an inescapable media frenzy where the evidence, or in this case, lack of it, appeared to be irrelevant. Instead, all that appeared to matter was the presence of an accusation. To my disbelief, even in some mainstream media, the onus of proof was completely reversed. The Sydney Morning Herald summed up the new reverse standard of proof in its declaration just days after the ABC article was published, that it's up to government to convince Australians that the Attorney-General is innocent. It is almost impossible for anyone to prove that something did not happen, let alone to positively disprove what at times completely bizarre allegations about something claimed in an unsigned document about a night 33 years ago, where a person withdrew the complaint and is now sadly deceased. From that point, when the reporting on both social media generally and in parts of the mainstream media shifted from a presumption of innocence to one of guilt, an impossible standard was set for any person to meet, politician or not. The most frightening indicator was that the public broadcaster was central to this shift to a presumption of guilt in a trial by media is in fact the ABC, seemingly with great care and effort, has reported only those parts of the information that it has in its possession which feeds into the narrative of guilt. I have recently been provided from a source outside the ABC with a copy of the only signed document that the person who made and subsequently withdrew the complaint ever made. Many parts of that 88-page document are such that any reasonable person could conclude that they show an allegation that lacks credibility, was based on repressed memory, which has been completely rejected by courts as unreliable and dangerous, which relied on diaries said to be drafted in 1990-91, but which were actually composed in 2019, and was written by someone who was, sadly, very unwell. This material, which remains unreported, clearly does not feed into the ABC's predetermined narrative of guilt by accusation, and presumably because this document detracts so substantively from the credibility of the allegations, there has been careful and deliberate avoidance in reporting it or publishing the parts of it that run counter to its chosen narrative. Having set in motion its trial by accusation, the ABC unleashed the Twitter version of an angry mob. In this online mob environment, the mere accusation reported by Australia's national broadcaster was determined adequate to assign guilt with no regard to evidence or, indeed, lack of evidence. All that seemed to matter was the fact that the accusation had been made and the identity of the person accused. The target of the Twitter mob then extended to everyone who contradicted the narrative of guilt by accusation. So fierce and vengeful is the response of the Twitter mob to anyone who dares to say anything contrary to the narrative of guilt, that those people then come to be deemed to commit a form of social crime for defending the subject of the unproven allegation, and the mob turns on them. This happened to my 2 female lawyers, amongst many others. The journalists who said anything in support of what were once accepted principles of due process, rule of law, and presumption of innocence in the context of accusations against me felt the full force of the Twitter mob. Thousands of ordinary people contacted me expressing disgust at what the ABC had done, even though I suspected action against the taxpayer-funded broadcaster was probably going to be financially unsustainable, as it ultimately was. I decided I had to commence action against the ABC. Some people wanted to help in that course by supporting my defamation case. They contributed to a trust on the basis of confidentiality and a belief that their contribution would remain confidential within the rules of disclosure. Whilst I have no right of access to the funding or conduct of the trust, on my request, the trustee provided me an assurance that none of the contributors were lobbyists or prohibited foreign entities. This additional information was provided as part of my ministerial disclosure. No doubt the desire of some, probably many, of those contributors to remain anonymous was driven by a natural desire to avoid the inevitable fact that for supporting me, the trial by mob would have inevitably turn on them if they were identified. Facing a false allegation is an experience that places your family, friends, and staff under enormous and cruel pressure. It has resulted in constant abuse and ongoing threats. For me personally, the physical threats of violence, the experience of being spat at and publicly abused for something I didn't do, has been nearly beyond comprehension in a civilized country. To my family, friends, staff, colleagues, and supporters who have helped me get through these most difficult days, words will never be enough to adequately express the deep gratitude I feel. I understand the questions raised in the media about the financial arrangements to help fund the now settled litigation, but I consider that I have provided the information required under the Members' Register of Interest. I also considered that the additional disclosures I provided under the ministerial standards were in accordance with the additional requirements. However, after discussing the matter with the Prime Minister, I accept that any uncertainty on this point provides a very unhelpful distraction for the government in its work. To the extent that uncertainty may be resolved by seeking further information in relation to the identities of the contributors, this would require me to put pressure on the Trust to provide me with the information, which I am not entitled. I am not prepared to seek to break the confidentiality of these people who have contributed to my legal fees under what are well-known and regular legal structures, including the confidentiality attached to the trust contribution. Ultimately, the Prime Minister is a person for whom I have the greatest personal and professional respect, but fully understanding the consequences where I am not willing to put pressure on the Trust to provide me with any further information, I respectfully informed the Prime Minister that I would not place pressure on the Trust to provide me with the information to which I am not entitled. I explained my reason for this was that I could not assist any process that would ultimately allow people who have done nothing wrong to become targets of social media, and I would continue to respect their positions. Ultimately, I decided that if I have to make a choice between seeking to put pressure on the Trust to break individuals' confidentiality in order to remain in Cabinet, or alternatively forego my Cabinet position, there is only one choice I could, in all conscience, make. Consequently, I provided the Prime Minister with my resignation earlier today. It is effective immediately. It has been a great honour to serve as the Coalition Cabinet Minister over the past 6 years, as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister before that. I believe the Morrison government has been a good and considered government in the most difficult time our country has faced since World War II. If the last decision I was part of in Cabinet was to provide Australia with a future deterrent of nuclear-powered submarines, then I have been part of a government that works to change the face of Australia's future security with a declaration that our children will thank us for. My greatest privilege has always been to serve the people of Pearce as their representative in the Australian Parliament since 2013 and to be re-elected by them in 2016 and 19. I previously stated my determination to contest the next election in Pearce and have nominated for pre-selection. I have no intention of standing aside from my responsibilities to the people of Pearce. Again, I thank the Prime Minister, my Cabinet and ministerial and parliamentary colleagues for their fellowship and support. I've always tried my best to fulfil my role as part of the hardworking team in the government, which will and now will work again to secure the return of the Morrison government whenever the next election is held. Authorised by Christian Porter, Liberal Party of Australia, Parliament House, Canberra. So essentially, he is trying to dismiss all the information as false. As I said, unfortunately, she's not with us, so we can't actually prove it either way. So essentially, from what I got from that, essentially it's the ABC's fault that he's in this problem, by the looks of it. Oh, I tell you, when are they going to start taking responsibility? So he wouldn't get the information. So this is the ABC. So he's resigned. Mr. Morrison had offered no defence of his industry and science minister and asked the head of the department to investigate whether a declaration was in breach of ministerial standards. On Sunday, Mr. Morrison announced Mr. Porter was unable to conclusively rule out a perceived conflict of interest and as a result had to resign. He has this afternoon taken the appropriate course of action to uphold those standards by tendering his resignation as a minister this afternoon, and I have accepted his resignation. His actions have been about upholding the standards. Excuse me, Mr. Prime Minister, he wouldn't have accepted the money if his actions were about upholding the standards. But hey, let's just try and, improve. We believe they are incredibly important, and it is not just about actual conflicts. It's about the standards for ministers to have an obligation to avoid any perception of conflicts of interest. That is ultimately what has led the minister to make that decision this afternoon. The Prime Minister revealed he was still waiting for the advice, but given that Mr. Porter had quit, the matter's now been closed. So they're not even going to look into it now to see whether it was, that there is an issue. The Minister has taken a decision which errs on the side of upholding the highest standards. Of course, Mr. Morrison is due to fly to the United States tomorrow for face-to-face meetings with leader of the Quad Strategic Alliance, and we get Barnaby. I think the thing that was concerning to me is that he would rather resign than find out who it was. So Porter will now move to the backbench, and Energy Minister Angus Taylor will now take over his portfolio temporarily. Ultimately, I decided if I had to make a choice between seeking to put pressure on the trust to break individuals' confidentiality to remain in cabinet or give up that cabinet position, he gave it up. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese has said that this is not the end of the matter, that Mr. Porter was in breach of his obligations as a member of parliament. He needs to answer where this money came from. Members of parliament, as well as ministers, just can't accept money from anonymous donors for a private legal matter. And that's what's happened here. Now, what's interesting, that even though he is a backbencher, backbenchers are held to the same standards. So there will now be pressure for this investigation to be continued to find out, because a politician can't have a conflict of interest. So, and that's what Mr. Albanese is saying. So they keep coming back to say no taxpayers were funded meeting the costs of the minister's actions against the ABC, but it costs the taxpayers a fortune. So he's confirmed that he is running, he's going to re-elect. Now, what was interesting, the finance minister says that disclosure was unusual. Earlier on Sunday, Finance Minister Simon Birmingham refused to say whether he would accept money from an anonymous source, saying it was not his job to offer a personal view. But Senator Birmingham conceded Mr. Porter's disclosure was unusual. That's why the Prime Minister has sought precise and specific advice on that, as he's done in relation to previous questions around conduct and compliance with the Code of Conduct. We all should act in accordance with the letter and the spirit of the God. The problem that I've got is, first of all, Porter was the Attorney General, and as the Attorney General, it was his job to make sure that the ministerial conduct was done. And it was just changed under his watch. He changed it. It was tightened under his watch, and he still stuffed it up. Anyway, so he's now no longer a cabinet minister. He's now a backbencher, so he's still a politician. So we'll see what's going to happen with that. I was really disappointed by his statement. His statement, in my view, in my opinion, was all about blaming the ABC and everybody else, because he was saying if the ABC didn't do the story on him, then he wouldn't have had to have sued them and he wouldn't have needed to take the money. Hello? And to try to imply that somebody who has a mental illness is an unreliable witness, I think is wrong. Just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you're unreliable. We have to stop this stigma. We've got to stop this stigma that if you have a mental illness, you're incapable of certain things. Whether she wrote the diary whenever she wrote it, if something like that happens to you, you never forget. In fact, some people wake up in the middle of the night or can't sleep because they have that vision. So from what I can work out by her journal entries, is that she was living that moment a lot, all over her time. So the other thing that was very interesting when we went through those documents, because we went through the journal articles and the diaries and everything, was that the same story was told to everybody. Everybody heard the same story. There was no embellishments. There were no changes to the story. The story stayed the same. And so he's saying that he got the original documentation from the ABC as to what was filed, and they didn't show everything. Here's my point. If he's upset at what the ABC had and want people to know the truth, why did he hide his defence? Why has he gone so hard to suppress everything? He mentioned, the ABC only told, didn't fit their narrative, so they didn't bring it out. Let us look at it. Let's put it all out on the table. Let us all look at it. Let us all make our own decision. I'd want to see everything. What I've seen horrifies me. But if you're that confident you're innocent, lay it all out. Why are you hiding it, Mr. Porter? What have you got to hide? Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. But tell me what you think. What do you think about his statement? What do you think that he's resigned? Should he be forced to resign as a politician? Further, should he be banned from having a cabinet position again? I think he should. To me, he's unreliable. But I'm interested to hear what you think about all of this. So tell me what you think in the comments below, and I will catch you live again on Monday night. But until then, keep safe and bye for now.